Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Where Silence Has Lease, which is episode 2 of season 2 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I covered the episode Where Silence Has Lease. So Where Silence Has Lease is the episode where Enterprise encounters a weird hole in space, and when they go to investigate, they get trapped and stuck into the hole where weird things happen, such as Romulan ships showing up out of nowhere and being destroyed very easily, or their sister ship Yamato just appearing out of nowhere but being completely empty. When they beam aboard, the design of it is very funky and weird. And then they find out that they are being experimented on like lab rats in a maze by an alien entity known as Nagilum, who appears and tells them that he wants to study death, so he's going to kill half of their crew in horrific ways in order to study what happens when one dies. So Picard decides in response to this to set the self-destruct to destroy the entire ship, so Nagilum lets them go and then tells Picard that they're too hostile to get along, and Picard pretty much says that they have the trait of curiosity in common. So I really liked this episode when I was growing up. This is, I think, one of my favorite episodes. Back when I was first getting into Star Trek, I used to make these little top 10s. Back when I've only seen up to season 4, and I think some episodes of season 5, but I haven't even seen all of the first 4 seasons. I think this was before I saw episodes like Yesterday's Enterprise and Best of Both Worlds. And I used to put this in my top 5 favorite episodes, along with like Future Imperfect, and trying to think what other episodes I really love. Skin of Evil, maybe. But anyway, so that didn't last very long. That was only when I was like 12 years old. Of course, as I watched more of Next Gen and Next Gen went on, this no longer was considered top 10 material for me. But I always kind of liked this episode. It has a very creepy quality to it. I think it's appropriate now that I'm watching and reviewing this episode in October, in the Halloween season, because it's got that kind of dark feel to it. It is kind of creepy, I will say, where they don't... where they don't really know. Sorry. Come on. where they don't really know what's going on, and weird stuff is happening, and it does have this sort of dark, creepy feel to it. And I think that's what attracted me to this episode. That and Nagilum, I kind of liked the concept of Nagilum, and I was actually hoping that Nagilum would appear again, but in retrospect, knowing more about the franchise and having seen all of Next Generation and other shows now, I completely rescind that feeling, and now feel like we don't need to see Nagilum again. He was kind of an unnecessary character. Now, of course, nowadays, having studied Star Trek and seen everything about it, I realize that Gene Roddenberry has an obsession with godlike aliens. Now, Roddenberry wasn't the showrunner at this stage of Next Gen, but he was still involved in the writing process and still had to approve all the scripts. And so I do definitely see that Roddenberry touch. I talked about that before with the original series in season 1 of TNG, how we get tons and tons and tons of godlike aliens, and in fact he had to insert Q into Encounter at Farpoint. That was all Roddenberry's idea in order just to buff up the runtime. So this does have a stereotypical powerful godlike alien, but I think it's a bit unique from a lot of the other ones that tend to blend together and be pretty much the same. And I'm an evil god-like alien. Look at my power. Because this one was more specifically like, and of course they make the comparison in this episode that just sort of, it's like a scientist studying lab rats, and of course they're saying that they're so more advanced in human beings that they would look on humans the way humans look on rats. And it's an interesting analogy in that direction, because Nagilum at the end of the episode finds himself superior and says, "Oh, you are too hostile." And much in the way, scientists would think they're superior to rodents, and oh my god, these are so primitive rodents, but they're torturing them and putting them through distress just to study them, and don't have any moral compunction about doing that. And that's what Nagilum's doing here. And so Nagilum comes off as sort of arrogant, asshole-ish by being like, "Oh, you're too hostile." It's like, what do you mean they're too hostile? You're the one freaking putting them through hell, and actually killed one of them and threatened to kill half of them just to see how it went. And you have the nerve to try to take the moral high ground. Get the hell out of here. But then again, that's very analogous to scientists who study lab rats or whatever. Of course, they look at rats and rodents as inferior species, but that's exactly how Nagilum looks at human beings. And of course, this is something always postulated throughout science fiction in general. Like, you get the "what if the aliens put human beings in zoos" thing, which we've seen over and over and over again. So this is a similar, and I'm sure there's been other works of science fiction that touched on what if the aliens were so superior they saw humans as inferior, so they studied them the same way we study rodents. So the concept is nothing, extraordinary or original, but I do like its implementation. The way it's implemented in this episode, I think, is, as I said, it's creepy. Particularly the scenes where Riker and Worf go on the Yamato, and there's you could hear scream. It's like the music they play is extremely eerie. And Riker hears Worf scream and runs to him, but then Worf said he heard Riker scream, and they go on the bridge, and they said, "Let's go to the bridge," but then they walk through the door to go to Turbulence, and all of a sudden they're on the bridge, and then they go to another door, and there's another bridge, and Worf enters that other bridge and just enters the same bridge from behind. It's really, really creepy. And then the Yamato starts disappearing, and then there's an exit of the weird space they're in that just so happens to appear when Riker and Worf are still trapped there. It was obviously Nagilum testing them to see if they would abandon the people who are on the Yamato. So that's all very interesting and very creepy. And, the part at the end where Nagilum appeared was also really creepy. And then, of course, Nagilum, kills Ensign Haskell. So, I gotta talk about this for a second. This is something I've noticed, particularly in my last viewing of this episode. What the hell happened to Wesley? Because Wesley was sitting in the con for the entire episode, and the one scene where once Riker and Worf being aboard the Yamato, all of a sudden Haskell's there. And of course this leads into the scene where he's killed by Nagilum. So where did Wesley... And then once Haskell's dead, Wesley returns. So where'd Wesley go? Did he have to use the bathroom? I mean, seriously. Why did he disappear for just a couple of minutes and then reappear? What was he doing? Was he using the bathroom in an emergency? No, I talked before about how ridiculous it is that a 14-year-old boy is one of the main senior staff, but he is. That's what the show established. So in an emergency, the senior staff usually are on post at their location. They don't like fuck off or to go get a drink or whatever if there's an emergency going on, which there clearly is. So where the hell did Wesley go? I think he had to use the bathroom. I think it was a number 2. Number 1, go take a number 2. And he just so happened to disappear long enough so Haskell could die. Of course, because they couldn't kill Wesley. So that was a bit of plot contrivance. I'm sorry. That's the only way to describe it. And also, like, I don't know, some people have criticized the way Haskell died as, like, over the top because it seems like he's, like, eating his own fist. But then I also heard other people describe it as kind of as actually really good because it sort of describes how he, like, rolls up into a ball as, like, you think his internal organs are exploding or something like that. And but I think the initial scream where he just gets up and goes, "Ah!" Like, yeah. Shatner would be proud. Let me just put it that way. And then I'm not gonna, and a lot of people point out how Nagilum was so perplexed by what Pulaski is, basically a woman, and like flings her around or whatever because he's like, oh, what is this? You're in different design. Really shows how male dominated this bridge actually was, because really he shouldn't, why is it women he picking on and men are the norm? But anyway, let's not get into that. But then the other thing is, what about Counselor Troy? She was like right there. And, some people pointed out why, if I was going to fling someone around, it would be Troy, but whatever. That's silly. But yeah, that thing was a bit dumb. But, anyway, when I'm talking about this episode, I absolutely have to talk about this meme I saw. Is one of my favorite Star Trek memes that has from this episode where Wesley Crusher is saying it appears to be a hole in space. However, the meme changes where it shows Picard responding to that by saying, well, "You're a hole in space," and then Troy is sitting right next to him and says, "Nice." That's one of my favorite memes. Like, the look they have Picard is like, "You're a hole in space." And I think having Troy say "nice" was just, that was the touch. That makes the whole meme hilarious. Anyway. I guess we could talk about let's talk about the way that Pulaski treats Data in this episode. As I mentioned in my review of The Child, it was a bad introduction to Pulaski, and then we get it even worse in this episode where Data is trying to, she asks Data to magnify the viewer and nothing happens. Obviously, it's Nagilum fucking with them. But she's like, turns to Picard and says, "Oh, it does know how to do this, right?" Referring to Data as an it. No, that's just, like, why would you write your new character that you want the audience to identify with, that you want the audience to see as a main cast member? Why would you have her be a complete and total asshole to Data in this way? They'd be like, "Oh, it does know what it's doing," and then she catches herself and apologizes. She's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just not used to working with non-living beings." And then she catches herself again. It's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, Starfleet record does say that you are alive. I have to accept that." Oh, good for you, Pulaski. Just because Starfleet tells you something, oh, I guess I gotta accept the fact that you're alive, even though you're just a walking toaster, you fuckhead. Like, I totally understand why people hate Pulaski, and yeah, she was just introduced extremely poorly. Anyway, let's talk about the Worf and Riker sort of holodeck calisthenics thing. This becomes somewhat a recurring theme. I think it appears in like one or two more episodes. This is something I always liked about this episode. The Riker, and I think this actually is what helps build this bond between Riker and Worf, which the show will have somewhat going forward. And I think it makes total sense that he would let off his steam through doing these, fighting these holographic monsters and seeing this sort of horrific environment. The fact that Picard's on the bridge all worried about it was stupid. Like, they're just going in a holodeck for exercise. You shouldn't be freaked out about it. It didn't occur to me until I watched the review just recently that this was a fake out from the writer's part, trying to make you think that Riker and Worf were on an away mission, and so it's supposed to be a shock when Riker calls to end program, which I never caught it that way. I think I always knew when I first watched this episode that they were in a holodeck. I think maybe I've seen references to this before. But anyway, yeah, that was kind of dumb. But I like the scene itself. And I actually buy that Worf would freak out and, be caught up in the bloodlust and turn on Riker until Riker has to tell him at ease. I think some people really hated this, and I think, yes, in later seasons they would kind of change his character where this doesn't really fit that much anymore. But I think seeing where he was in season 1, I think it totally fits. And I do buy that Worf, when he's caught up in it, would sort of let the, moment get the better of him. And I think that he did probably outgrow this as he got older. So I would say it would make sense in universe too, but that's just me. So another thing about this episode is it does contain a really good scene. Like a scene that I really like, and in fact I saw people made YouTube videos out of it about Picard discusses the afterlife and death or whatever, where Nagilum sends fake Data and fake Troy to talk to him to try to get him to change his mind of setting the self-destruct button, and the Data, or fake Data, faux Data I should call him, asks the question, or faux Data. Anyway, he asks the question, what is death? And Picard's like, oh, is that all? And then he goes into this spiel about different beliefs, and so the first thing he goes to seems to be a very sort of normalized religious or spiritual belief about the afterlife and higher power, very generalized, and then he gets into a more atheistic view of blinking out of nothingness. But Picard's ultimate thing, when Data confronts him, is like, well, what do you, Picard, believe? And he says, well, I don't really know, but given the complexities of, human life and existence and the universe and everything, I find that the real answer's got to be more complex than either of those two explanations. And it's a very intelligent, very well thought out scene. In fact, Mr. Picard, I totally agree with you. That would actually be a very good explanation. Like, if anyone asks me what I think happens after you die, I should just show them this clip. Because, yeah, I think I agree with Picard that it's got to be more... I don't know is the answer, but it's got to be more complex and more different and not as simple as either of those two explanations. But that is just me, but also Picard, apparently. Well, probably Roddenberry, whoever wrote this episode. But still, like, I think that is a really good Picard moment. And, of course, it also shows when afterwards Data and Troy start being like, it's wrong, you shouldn't kill him. And Picard's like, yeah, this is wrong. Troy and Data wouldn't be talking like this. It's you, Nagilum. Shut the hell up. That was a cool Picard moment, by the way, when he did that and he called him out. And Nagilum did kind of tip his hand a bit, because at first Data and Troy were kind of acting like Data and Troy, but then they started going totally full on, you shouldn't kill us, you're wrong to do so. And it's like, yeah, this is not really Troy and Data. So yeah, no, that was definitely a cool scene as well. Anyway, yeah, I think I pretty much covered everything there is to cover about this episode. Yeah, the weird encounter with the Romulans, the weird, blackness that just appeared out of everywhere. Like, it was a really creepy, eerie, that's the word I'm looking for. It was definitely eerie, a very eerie episode. So anyway, I would now like to thank all my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It is very much appreciated. Very humbled by everyone's support, and it really helps me to keep going. So I'll give a quick shout out to Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Manijester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Migalisio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neil Howells. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we have a few patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, Ensign Haskell, I knew him well, sitting in Wesley's chair while he takes his break apparently, and I won't even get into certain tropes where conveniently it's the minority ensign who becomes disposable. Worf's holodeck Skeletor program is introduced in this episode. We get a familiar TOS trope of a godlike head on the teleprompter, and get even a TOS fashion style sexism by having him curious and move Pulaski around because she's female. As a villain, Nagilum may be terrifying, but also pedestrian, and could easily exist back in the 60s, maybe even more appropriately with Kirk. In fact, until Troy and Data come to ask Picard about death, I wouldn't have seen that much difference as to who the captain was. Granted, that was a good scene. As for Worf, his rage on dual bridges of the Yamato, I almost wonder if the writers were still trying to figure out how to write his character at this point. I know some out there love this episode, but for me, I'd say it's at best average. 5 hands on your head, agonizing in pain out of 10. Yes, that's a very good point about Nagilum being TOS. Like, I hadn't thought of it that way, but it's definitely true. So next comment is from Greg Marley, who says, this is such a first/second season episode, but I like the eeriness and mystery. I also like how aggravated Riker is when he gets back from the Yamato and is stalking around the bridge complaining to everyone and says, what the hell is going on here? I've had it. Let's put all this technology to use and figure it out and get out of here. Then, when Data and the Navigator are trying to lock onto the signal that keeps disappearing, Riker literally looks up in the air and like he's about to scream. And it's still funny when Nagilum asks them to show how they propagate the species, and Pulaski deadpans not likely. Pulaski has another good line when Picard suggests destroying the ship, and she says, why do I get the feeling now wasn't a good time to join the ship? There's another line Pulaski says that I actually like, is when Picard says he's going to set the self-destruct. She says, isn't that like curing the disease by killing the patient? Which is interesting because I see that point of view, but Pulaski doesn't push him on this. In fact, no one pushes him on, well, no one for real. He had the fake Troy and fake Data, but no real person actually challenges the fact that he's rather would have them all die than have half of them die in horrific ways. But I kind of agree with Picard here that it's similar to what Kirk did in Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, where he would rather destroy the ship than let Commissioner Veal take over the ship and take it where Kirk doesn't order. I think it's similar in that regard, so I buy that the crew would be behind him. But anyway, my rating for Where Silence Has Lease out of 10 is an 8, extremely good. Now, you could call me a bit biased towards this episode because it's something that I've always liked. When I was younger, it was one of the first episodes of Trek that I liked. But I think even now it holds up, despite the complaints I have about it. I think the eeriness of it, the mystery of it, really works. And it is just bizarre, and you can really feel Riker's frustration and tension and the frustration of the entire crew as the strange shit is happening, and it makes total sense that it's just some powerful alien fucking with them in order to test them, and that he will go as far as to want to kill half the crew, and Picard outwits them by threatening to just destroy the whole ship. So yeah, I think that was quite a powerful episode. So, coming up next on my channel, let's see, bring up the schedule here. So, yeah, next Monday will be my review for Elementary, Dear Data. And Thursday, I will review Season 4 of Star Trek Lower Decks as a whole. And then on Saturday, review Loki Season 2 as a whole. And then next Monday, back with another TNG review for The Outrageous Okana. Can't wait for that one. Anyway, be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover Next Generation and cover many more videos and many more Star Trek videos. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.